Press your hand against a wall right now. Feel the solid surface beneath your palm. 40,000 years ago, someone did exactly this in a cave in Indonesia. They pressed their hand against stone, blew pigment around it, and left a mark that still exists today. The oldest known human handprint. Think about that moment. Someone wanted to leave a trace of themselves, to say I was here, to make something that would outlast their brief life. That impulse, that need to create, to record, to express. It appeared suddenly across the world around 40,000 years ago, and no one knows exactly why. If you are listening to this as you fall asleep, perfect. This mystery has waited 40 millennia. It can wait until morning. Tonight we're exploring the moment when humans became artists, when we started making things not for survival, but for meaning. Subscribe and stick around. The scope of this transformation is staggering when you really consider it. For roughly 160,000 years, anatomically modern humans walked the earth, leaving behind almost nothing but stone tools and animal bones. Then, in a span of perhaps 10,000 years, everything changed. Art exploded across 3 continents simultaneously. We call this the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. Though revolution might be too weak a word, it was more like an awakening. A species that had been sleepwalking through existence suddenly opened its eyes and saw the world anew, and felt compelled to respond to what it saw through creation. What makes this mystery so compelling is that the humans before and after this transformation were biologically identical. Same brains, same bodies, same genetic potential, yet their behavior was radically different. It is as if they were the same instrument, but someone finally learned how to play it. For most of human existence, we made tools. Practical objects for cutting, scraping, hunting. The archaeological record is filled with stone implements designed purely for function. Effective, yes, elegant, sometimes, but not beautiful for beauty's sake, not symbolic, not art. Then something changed. Around 40,000 years ago, humans started creating things that served no obvious practical purpose. Carved figurines, painted caves, jewelry made from shells and teeth, musical instruments carved from bone. An explosion of creativity that archaeologists call the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. The transformation was dramatic. Before this period, human artifacts are almost entirely functional. After it, they're flooded with symbolic objects, objects that mean something beyond their physical form, objects created to communicate ideas, to express identity, to reach towards something we might call the sacred. The timeline is striking. For roughly 200,000 years, anatomically modern humans existed without leaving much evidence of symbolic behavior. Then, in what amounts to an evolutionary instant, everything changed. Art appeared, music appeared, complex burial practices appeared. What happened? This is one of the great mysteries of human evolution. Not how we became human biologically, but how we became human culturally. How we went from making things to making meaning, from surviving to creating, from existing to expressing. The birth of everything we recognize as distinctly human. Let's start with the evidence. What exactly appeared during this creative explosion? The cave paintings are the most famous examples. Chauvet Cave in France contains images dating back 36,000 years. Horses, lions, rhinoceroses, rendered with a skill and artistry that still astonishes visitors today. These aren't primitive scrawls. They're sophisticated compositions showing movement, perspective, even something like narrative. The artists understood how to use the natural contours of the cave walls to create three-dimensional effects. They knew how to blend pigments, how to suggest motion in static images. The technical sophistication is remarkable. The Chauvet artists used techniques that wouldn't be rediscovered until the Renaissance. They employed shading to create depth. They used the recesses and protrusions of the rock face to give their animals three-dimensional form. Some images were scraped into the stone, creating lighter outlines that contrast with darker painted areas. They even experimented with something like animation. Some figures have multiple legs painted in different positions, creating the illusion of movement when seen by flickering torchlight. Imagine standing in that cave 36,000 years ago, watching horses seem to gallop across the wall as your torch flames dance. At Lascaux, painted around 17,000 years ago. The Great Hall of Bulls contains figures up to 17 feet long. The composition flows around the circular chamber, drawing the eye from one animal to the next. Whoever created this understood visual storytelling at a sophisticated level. The Lascaux artists didn't just paint on any available surface. They chose their locations deliberately. Certain chambers were selected for specific types of images. The acoustics of different spaces seem to have influenced what was painted there. Spaces with strong echoes often contain images of hoofed animals, as if the artists wanted the sound of hooves to accompany the visuals. Recent research has revealed even more complexity. Some images were painted over earlier ones, suggesting the caves were used repeatedly over thousands of years. The paintings weren't single creative acts but accumulated cultural deposits, generations adding their marks to sacred spaces their ancestors had established. But cave paintings are just the beginning. The same period produced carved figurines of remarkable sophistication. The Lion Man of Hollenstein-Stadel, carved from mammoth ivory around 40,000 years ago, stands nearly a foot tall, a human body with a lion's head, the oldest known representation of something that doesn't exist in nature. Think about what that means. Someone imagined a creature that combined human and animal features. Then they spent hundreds of hours carving that imagined creature into physical form. This requires abstract thinking, the ability to manipulate mental images, to conceive of things that have no physical referent. Researchers estimate the Lion Man required over 400 hours to complete. That is 10 weeks of full-time work with stone tools on mammoth ivory, one of the hardest organic materials to carve. This wasn't casual doodling. This was serious investment in creating something purely symbolic. And the Lion Man wasn't alone. Similar hybrid figures have been found at other sites from the same period. Beings that combine human and animal features, creatures from imagination rather than observation. These artifacts prove that early humans could think in ways that transcend immediate reality. The Venus figurines appeared around the same time. Small carved figures of women with exaggerated features, found across Europe from France to Russia. Whatever they meant to their creators, they clearly meant something important. People carried them across vast distances. They were treasured objects. Over 200 Venus figurines have been discovered, spanning 25,000 years and thousands of miles. Despite the vast distances and time spans separating their creation, they share remarkable similarities. The same emphasis on certain anatomical features, the same stylization. This suggests either cultural contact across enormous distances or parallel development of shared symbolic systems. Musical instruments emerged during this period too. Bone flutes dating back 40,000 years have been found in German caves, not crude noisemakers, but carefully tuned instruments capable of playing recognizable melodies. Someone understood acoustics. Someone cared about making beautiful sounds. The flutes found at Hohlfels Cave in Germany are made from the wing bones of griffon vultures. The bones were hollowed out, and finger holes were drilled at precise intervals. When played, these instruments produce a range of notes that fit recognizable musical scales. This wasn't random noise-making, this was music. Think about what music represents cognitively. You have to understand that sounds can be organized according to abstract patterns, that certain combinations of tones create emotional effects, that sounds unfolding through time can tell a kind of story. Musical cognition is deeply complex, and our ancestors had it 40,000 years ago. Burial practices became elaborate. Bodies were covered with red ochre, grave goods were included, jewelry, tools, objects that might be useful in some imagined afterlife. This suggests beliefs about death that go beyond simple awareness of mortality, concepts of continuation of other realms. Personal ornamentation exploded. Beads made from shells, teeth, and carved bone appear in abundance. These items required significant effort to create. They served no practical purpose. Their only function was to communicate something about the wearer: identity, status, group membership, beauty. The geographic spread is remarkable. This creative explosion happened not just in Europe, but across Africa, Asia, and eventually Australia. Different groups in different environments all began expressing themselves symbolically around the same time, as if a switch had been flipped across the entire species. In Australia, rock art appears shortly after humans first arrived on that continent. Around 45,000 years ago, in Southeast Asia, cave paintings rival European sites in age and sophistication in Africa. The symbolic traditions that began even earlier continued and intensified. The creative explosion was truly global. So, what caused this transformation? Why did humans suddenly become creative after 200,000 years of relative behavioral stagnation? This question has generated intense debate for decades, and the answers proposed tell us something profound about the nature of human creativity itself. Some researchers have spent entire careers trying to solve this puzzle. Others have devoted decades to documenting the evidence. The debate continues in academic journals and conference halls around the world. New discoveries regularly reshape our understanding. Old theories are challenged and refined. The stakes feel higher than merely understanding the past. By figuring out what sparked human creativity, we might better understand creativity itself, what it requires, how it works, why some conditions nurture it while others suppress it. The creative explosion offers clues about human nature itself. The first theory is neurological. Perhaps the human brain underwent some final rewiring around 40,000 years ago, a genetic mutation that enabled new cognitive capabilities, the hardware upgrade that finally allowed the software of symbolic thinking to run properly. Supporters point to subtle changes in skull shape during this period. The forehead became more vertical, the brain case more globular. Perhaps these external changes reflected internal reorganization, new connections between brain regions, enhanced capacity for abstract thought. The final piece of the cognitive puzzle. The FOXP2 gene is sometimes invoked here. This gene is crucial for the fine motor control needed for speech. Humans have a unique variant that differs from other primates. Perhaps language capabilities crossed some threshold around 40,000 years ago, enabling the kind of abstract thinking necessary for symbolic behavior. But here is the problem with the neurological theory. We've found evidence of symbolic behavior before 40,000 years ago. Shell beads from Blombos Cave in South Africa date back 75,000 years. Ochre engravings from even earlier. If the brain wasn't ready, how do we explain these earlier examples? The evidence suggests the capacity for symbolic thought existed long before the creative explosion. The brain was ready. Something else was preventing that capacity from being fully expressed. The hardware was installed, but conditions weren't right for it to be used at scale. This brings us to the demographic theory. What if the creative explosion wasn't caused by new cognitive abilities, but by population reaching a critical threshold? Innovation requires not just smart individuals, but enough smart individuals interacting to maintain and build on ideas. Consider how creativity actually works. Someone has a new idea. They share it with others. Those others improve on it. The improvements spread. Knowledge accumulates exponentially. But this process requires a certain population density. Too few people, and innovations are lost faster than they can spread. This is sometimes called the tipping point theory of cultural evolution. Below a certain population threshold, complex behaviors cannot sustain themselves. They appear sporadically but always fade away. Above that threshold, they become self-sustaining and start to accumulate. The threshold itself might be surprisingly sharp. For most of human history, populations were tiny and scattered, small bands separated by vast distances. Even brilliant innovations could easily be lost when their inventors died without passing the knowledge on. The chain of cultural transmission kept breaking. Progress kept resetting to zero. Imagine you are a Stone Age genius. You invent something truly useful. A better tool, a better technique. You teach it to your children and your neighbors. But your band numbers only 30 people. A bad winter kills half of them, including everyone you taught. Your invention dies with them. This scenario played out countless times over hundreds of thousands of years. Innovations flickering into existence and then vanishing. The same discoveries being made and lost repeatedly in different places. Not because humans weren't smart enough, but because there weren't enough of them to maintain cultural continuity. Around 40,000 years ago, human populations began growing significantly. Groups encountered each other more frequently. Trade networks emerged connecting distant communities. Ideas could finally spread faster than they were being lost. The cultural ratchet finally engaged and started turning consistently forward. The evidence for increased connectivity is compelling. Objects from this period show up far from where they were made. Shells from the Mediterranean appear in sites hundreds of miles inland. Flint from specific quarries was transported vast distances. People weren't just surviving in isolation anymore. They were part of larger networks. Computer simulations support this theory. Researchers have modeled how complex culture behaves at different population densities. Below a certain threshold, even useful innovations fade away within a few generations. Above that threshold, they persist and accumulate. The transition can be sudden and dramatic. The demographic theory explains why the creative explosion happened when it did. Even though the cognitive capacity existed earlier, it wasn't about individual capability. It was about collective conditions. The network effects that allow culture to flourish. You need enough nodes before the network becomes self-sustaining. But here is the thing. Population growth alone might not be enough. Some researchers point to climate as a crucial factor. Around 40,000 years ago, the Earth was experiencing dramatic environmental changes. These changes may have created both pressures and opportunities that sparked creative innovation. The ice ages weren't static, they fluctuated. Periods of extreme cold alternated with warmer intervals. These oscillations created constantly shifting environments. Animals migrated. Plant communities changed. Humans had to adapt continuously or perish. This pressure may have selected for innovative thinking. The period around 40,000 years ago saw particularly intense climate variability. Temperature swings that would normally take thousands of years occurred within centuries. Ecosystems reorganized rapidly. Species went extinct. New opportunities appeared and disappeared. It was a time of unprecedented environmental turbulence. This instability may have been exactly what human creativity needed. Stable environments reward doing things the way they've always been done. Unstable environments reward innovation. When the old ways stop working, you either invent new ways or you die. Climate chaos may have been the crucible that forged human creativity. When the environment changes rapidly, the old ways of doing things no longer work. You can't rely on tradition. You have to experiment. Try new approaches. Think creatively about novel problems. The climate instability of this period may have been a forcing function for innovation. At the same time, certain climate windows opened opportunities. Warmer periods allowed populations to expand into new territories. Groups that had been isolated came into contact. Ideas and genes and technologies mixed and recombined. These periods of environmental hospitality may have enabled the cultural explosion. The movement into new territories brought its own creative pressures. When humans spread into Europe from Africa and the Middle East, they encountered environments unlike anything their ancestors had known. New animals, new plants, new challenges, everything had to be learned or invented fresh. They also encountered other human species. Neanderthals had lived in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. When modern humans arrived, the two groups interacted. We know from genetics that they interbred. They may also have exchanged ideas and technologies. Competition and cooperation between species may have accelerated innovation. The climate theory intersects with another idea, the social complexity hypothesis. As populations grew and groups encountered each other more frequently, social challenges became more complex. You had to navigate relationships with more people, distinguish friends from foes. Remember obligations and debts across longer time spans. In small bands where everyone knows everyone, social navigation is relatively simple. But as group sizes grow and interactions between groups become frequent, the social calculus becomes exponentially more complex. You need new cognitive tools for managing all this social information. Symbolic systems help with that. Symbolic behavior may have emerged partly as a tool for managing this social complexity. Personal ornaments signal group membership. Art objects create shared meaning. Rituals bind communities together. These symbolic practices help coordinate behavior among people who don't know each other intimately. Think about how symbolic markers work today. Uniforms, flags, brand logos, wedding rings. These objects communicate vast amounts of social information instantly. They tell us who belongs to which group, what relationships exist, what expectations apply. The first shell beads may have served similar functions. When you meet a stranger, their ornaments tell you something about them before a word is spoken. Are they from a friendly group or a hostile one? Do they share your beliefs? What is their status? These questions matter enormously when interactions between groups become frequent. Art might have evolved partly as a social bonding mechanism. Creating and experiencing art together generates shared emotional states. It synchronizes feelings across individuals. It creates collective memories. A group that paints together, sings together, dances together becomes more cohesive, more cooperative, more successful. This theory helps explain why art appears universally across human cultures. It is not a luxury that only appears when survival is secure. It is a survival tool itself, a technology for building and maintaining the social bonds that human survival depends on. Art is practical, just not in an obvious way. But here is where it gets even more interesting. Some researchers believe the creative explosion was driven by a revolution in human cognition that wasn't genetic at all. It was cultural, a new way of thinking that spread like a virus through human populations, a cognitive technology rather than a cognitive mutation. This is a profound idea. It suggests that the way we think isn't determined solely by our biology. Our cognitive capabilities can be enhanced by cultural innovations, tools for thought that we learn rather than inherit genetically. The creative explosion might mark the emergence of such tools. The most powerful cognitive technology is language. Not just any language, but fully recursive language. The ability to embed concepts within concepts infinitely. To talk about things that aren't present, to describe hypotheticals, to tell stories about the past and make plans for the future. To think about thinking itself, recursive language lets you say things like, I think that she believes that he wants her to know. Each embedded clause adds another layer of representation, another level of abstraction. This capacity for nested abstraction may be the foundation of all higher cognitive abilities. With recursive language, you can teach complex skills by describing them rather than just demonstrating them. You can communicate abstract concepts. You can build mental models of situations you've never experienced. You can plan for contingencies that haven't happened yet. The cognitive toolkit expands enormously. Language also enables a kind of collective intelligence. Individual humans have limited memory and processing power, but connected through language, groups can store and process far more information than any individual could alone. Culture becomes an external hard drive for the human mind. Perhaps language existed before 40,000 years ago, but in a simpler form, a proto-language adequate for immediate coordination, but not for abstract discussion. Then some innovation in how language was used crossed a threshold. Suddenly, the full power of symbolic communication became available. What might that innovation have been? Some researchers suggest it was the emergence of syntax, the rules for combining words into meaningful sentences. Before syntax, humans might have used words like labels after syntax. They could combine words to create entirely new meanings. Others point to the development of displacement. The ability to talk about things removed in time and space, to discuss yesterday and tomorrow, to describe distant places, to speculate about things that might happen. This capacity for mental time travel may have been the key innovation. This linguistic revolution wouldn't leave direct evidence. Words don't fossilize, but it would leave indirect evidence in the form of symbolic artifacts. If you can think in fully symbolic terms, you can create fully symbolic objects. Art and language may be two expressions of the same underlying cognitive transformation. The theory gains support from studies of modern humans raised without full language access. Deaf individuals who never learned sign language show impaired abstract thinking. Language doesn't just express thoughts, it shapes what thoughts are possible. It is the scaffolding on which complex cognition is built. Another fascinating theory focuses on consciousness itself. Some researchers propose that full self-awareness emerged around this time. The ability to think about yourself as an entity moving through time, to imagine your own death, to wonder about your place in the cosmos. True introspection. This is different from mere intelligence. Many animals are intelligent. They solve problems. They learn from experience. They remember the past and anticipate the future. But do they know that they're doing these things? Do they have an inner observer watching their own mental processes? Self-awareness creates a fundamentally different relationship to existence. When you know that you exist, you also know that you will someday cease to exist. This knowledge of mortality changes everything. It creates urgency. It prompts questions. It demands meaning. If this theory is correct, the creative explosion represents the birth of the human soul, or at least the birth of our awareness of having one. The moment when humans started asking the big questions: why are we here? What happens when we die? What does it all mean? Art would emerge naturally from this kind of consciousness. If you are aware of your mortality, you might want to create something that outlasts you. If you wonder about invisible forces, you might try to represent them visually. If you sense something sacred, you might try to honor it through creation. The cave paintings might be attempts to capture experiences of altered consciousness. Some researchers have noted that many images resemble the patterns people see during trance states, spirals, grids, dots. These are universal features of the human visual system that appear when normal perception is disrupted. If early humans experienced trances through fasting, rhythmic dancing, or plant substances, they may have believed they were accessing another reality. The cave paintings might be records of these experiences, maps of the spirit world, attempts to make the invisible visible. The burial practices of this period support this interpretation, covering bodies with red ochre, including grave goods for the afterlife. These practices imply beliefs about what happens after death, concepts of continuation of other realms, of existence beyond the physical. These are deeply conscious concerns, but consciousness is notoriously difficult to study, even in living humans. Inferring it from archaeological remains is speculative at best. We can't know what our ancestors were thinking. We can only see the traces they left behind and try to interpret what those traces might mean. Perhaps the most compelling theory combines all of these elements, multiple factors converging at the same historical moment: population growth, climate opportunity, social complexity, linguistic innovation, and emerging self-awareness, all reinforcing each other in a feedback loop that produced the creative explosion. This view suggests there was no single cause, no magic moment when everything changed. Instead, a gradual accumulation of conditions that finally reached a tipping point, like water heating slowly until suddenly it boils. The transformation appears sudden only because the build-up was invisible. Think about how feedback loops work. Population growth enables more innovation enables better survival enables more population growth. Language improves as more people use it. More people using language drives social complexity. Social complexity demands more sophisticated language. Once these loops started spinning together, they would accelerate each other. The creative explosion wasn't a single event, but an emergent property of multiple interacting systems, each element amplifying the others until the combined effect became visible in the archaeological record. The creative explosion might represent the moment when human culture became self-sustaining. Before this point, innovations could be lost, progress could reverse. The cultural flame kept flickering out. After this point, the flame became a self-feeding fire. It could only grow larger. This is sometimes called the cultural ratchet. A ratchet can only turn one direction once a certain level of complexity is reached. It cannot fall back below that level. The accumulated innovations create conditions that make further innovation inevitable. Progress becomes a one-way process. Before 40,000 years ago, the ratchet kept slipping. Innovations appeared but couldn't accumulate. After 40,000 years ago, the ratchet engaged. Every generation inherited what previous generations had created and added to it. The accumulation has never stopped. And here is something remarkable to consider. Whatever caused the creative explosion, it changed everything. Not just for the humans alive at the time, but for all humans who would ever live afterward, including you. You are a product of that transformation in ways you experience every single day. The capacity for symbolic thought that emerged 40,000 years ago is the foundation of everything distinctly human: language, art, science, philosophy, religion, technology, politics. All of it rests on our ability to create and manipulate symbols, to make marks that mean more than what they literally are. When you read these words, you are using abilities that first emerged in those ancient cave painters. The same cognitive machinery that created the Lion Man now creates novels and equations and symphonies and software. The tools have changed. The underlying capacity remains the same. Consider how much of your daily experience depends on symbolic thought. The language you use, the numbers you calculate with, the maps you navigate by, the music you listen to, the stories you consume. Every bit of it runs on cognitive machinery that emerged in the creative explosion. Even your sense of self is a symbolic construction. The story you tell about who you are, your memories organized into narrative form, your plans for the future imagined before they happen. Your identity exists in symbols as much as in flesh. This too began 40,000 years ago. The creative explosion wasn't just a historical event. It was the beginning of a new kind of existence, a new way of being in the world. Before it, humans were intelligent animals doing what intelligent animals do. After it, humans were something unprecedented. Creatures who could transform their own minds through culture. Think about what that means. We are the only species that can consciously redesign our own cognition. We create external symbol systems, languages, writing, mathematics, art. These systems then reshape how we think. We build tools for thought that make new thoughts possible. A medieval scholar had different cognitive capabilities than a modern scientist, not because their brains differed, but because the symbolic tools available to them differed. Calculus enables thoughts that are impossible without it. So does musical notation. So does computer programming. Each new symbolic system expands what minds can do. A child raised today has access to cognitive resources that didn't exist even a century ago. Mathematical notations, scientific vocabularies, digital interfaces. Each generation inherits the mental tools created by previous generations and can build new ones. The cognitive evolution that began 40,000 years ago continues, and it is accelerating. The pace of symbolic innovation grows faster with each generation. The creative explosion wasn't a one-time event. It was the ignition of a process that continues to this day. We're still living in the explosion. It hasn't ended. It is only beginning. Perhaps this is why the creative explosion feels so mysterious. We're trying to understand the moment when understanding itself became possible, using the very capabilities that emerged from that transformation to analyze the transformation. It is like using a mirror to see your own eyes. The ancient artists of Chauvet and Lascaux were doing something we still do, trying to make sense of existence through creation, trying to capture something ineffable in physical form, reaching toward understanding through the act of making. This is the human condition, and we still don't fully understand why we do it. Why does creating feel meaningful? Why does art move us? Why do we need to make our mark? These questions don't have scientific answers yet. Perhaps they never will. Perhaps some aspects of human experience resist explanation. What we do know is that the impulse is universal. Every human culture creates art. Every culture has music and dance and story. Every culture decorates and ornaments and ritualizes. This universality suggests the creative drive is deep in our nature, not optional, essential. When you feel the urge to create something, you are experiencing the same drive that produced the first cave paintings. When you appreciate a beautiful object or moving piece of music, you are using capacities that emerged 40,000 years ago. Your aesthetic sense has ancient roots, and perhaps that is why art feels sacred even in secular contexts. It connects us to something larger than ourselves, to the long chain of creators stretching back to the first humans who pressed their hands against cave walls, to the continuous human project of making meaning from existence. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, consider that you are the inheritor of 40,000 years of accumulated creativity. Every song you've ever loved, every story that moved you, every image that stopped you in your tracks, all of it flows from that ancient explosion. All of it lives in you. You carry within you the capacity that produced Chauvet and Lascaux. The same neural architecture that carved the Lion Man processes the images you see every day. The same drive that made those first flutes makes you tap your foot to music. You are not separate from that ancient creative awakening. You are its continuation. The mystery of why it began may never be fully solved, but the fact that it continues is undeniable. You prove it every day, every time you imagine something that doesn't exist, every time you communicate an abstract idea, every time you create something new, however small. Even the act of listening to this represents the creative explosion in action. Language encoded as sound waves, transmitted through technology, decoded by your brain into meaning, symbols all the way down. You are using the cognitive capacities that emerged 40,000 years ago to contemplate those same capacities. The people who painted Chauvet Cave couldn't have imagined your world. The technologies, the scale of human achievement, the billions of minds connected through invisible networks. But they would recognize you, the same curious consciousness looking out at the same mysterious universe. They would recognize the hunger for meaning that drives you, the need to make sense of existence, the desire to leave some mark that says you were here. These are not modern inventions. They are ancient inheritances, the very first human traits to emerge into full flower. You share with them the peculiar human burden of awareness, the knowledge that you exist, the knowledge that you will die, the need to make something of the time in between, the drive to leave a mark, to say, I was here, to reach toward meaning. This is what makes us human. Not just intelligence, not just tool use. Other animals have those. What we have is the capacity to stand outside ourselves and wonder, to create symbols that capture what we wonder about, to share those symbols with others who share our wondering, and to wonder together. That might be the deepest gift of the creative explosion. Not just individual creativity, but shared creativity. The ability to combine our wondering into something larger than any single mind could produce. Collective imagination building collective worlds. The creative explosion was the birth of shared meaning. Before it, humans lived in private worlds. After it, Humans could build shared worlds made of symbols. These shared worlds now contain everything we call civilization. Every institution, every tradition, every dream. If you are drifting off now, let these ideas settle gently. The mystery is patient. It has been waiting 40,000 years to be understood. It can wait a few more hours while you rest. The cave paintings will still be there in the morning. The questions will still be open. Perhaps in your dreams, you'll visit those ancient caves. Stand where the first artists stood. Feel the cool stone under your hand. See the flickering torchlight bringing painted animals to life. Understand something that daylight understanding can't reach. Dreams themselves might be where art began. Those vivid images that come unbidden in sleep, the strange narratives that unfold without direction. Perhaps the first artists were trying to capture what they saw when they closed their eyes, to make the inner visible, to share the unshareable. Some researchers have proposed exactly this, that cave art represents dream visions, that the animals painted in the depths weren't observed animals, but dreamed ones, creatures from the inner landscape given outer form. The first art is the first attempt to communicate the contents of consciousness. We dream the same kinds of dreams they dreamed. Flying, falling, being chased. Encounters with strange beings. The dream world is shared across human cultures and across human time, another universal that connects us to our ancient creative ancestors. The creative explosion gave us the tools to share our dreams, to describe what we see inside, to compare notes on the strange experience of being conscious creatures in an incomprehensible universe. Art is the bridge between isolated minds. Language is how we walk across. And tonight, across the world, millions of people are falling asleep, just like you. Each one carrying the same creative inheritance. Each one dreaming their private dreams. Each one part of the same human story that began when someone first pressed their hand against a cave wall. That handprint is still there. In Indonesia, in France, in Spain, in Argentina. Hands pressed against stone tens of thousands of years ago, saying the same thing we all want to say. I existed. I was here. I mattered. Remember me. Those handprints might be the most moving of all the ancient art. Not because of their sophistication, but because of their simplicity. A human hand pressed against stone, outlined in pigment. The most basic possible statement of presence. I am here. This is my hand. This is proof that I existed 40,000 years later. We still understand that message perfectly. We feel the same desire to leave our mark, to be remembered. To matter, the creative explosion gave us countless ways to express this fundamental human need, but the handprint remains the purest expression of all. Tomorrow there will be new creations, new art, new music, new stories, new discoveries about why we create at all. The explosion continues. The fire burns on, and you are part of it. Every thought you think, every mark you make, every meaning you create, the questions that began 40,000 years ago are still being asked. What does it mean to be human? What is consciousness? Why do we create? These questions may never have final answers, but asking them is itself a form of creation. a way of reaching toward understanding. But for now, rest. Let your creative mind regenerate. Let your dreaming brain process the wonder and mystery of existence. Let yourself simply be, for these quiet hours, another conscious creature under the same stars the first artists saw. Your brain is doing important work even as you sleep, consolidating memories, processing experiences, making connections between disparate ideas. Some researchers believe creativity is partly a product of sleep, the unconscious mind working on problems the conscious mind has given up on. Perhaps the ancient artists dreamed their paintings before they made them, saw the animals on the cave walls before they picked up their pigments. Let the images emerge from sleep into waking, used their dreams as blueprints for creation. The questions will still be here. Why did humans become creative? What sparked the explosion? What does art mean? These mysteries are part of your inheritance too. The not knowing, the wondering, the endless human drive to understand ourselves. 40,000 years of creativity. 40,000 years of humans making meaning from chaos. 40,000 years of art and music and story, and it all lives in you, waiting to be expressed, waiting to continue, waiting for you to add your mark to the cave wall. Sleep now, dream deeply, and know that somewhere in your dreams, the ancient artists are still painting, still carving, still singing, still reaching towards something they can almost grasp, just like you, just like all of us, forever human, forever creating, forever wondering why. Good night. Thank you for wondering with me about the birth of human creativity, about the moment when we became more than clever animals, about the mystery that makes us who we are. Rest well, and may your dreams be full of ancient images and new ideas waiting to be born.